The next day, we returned to the Frontera territory. Javier reported to the Baron that they would be leaving in a week, and, to minimize expenses, the young master requested about 10 men to accompany him. Taking care of a plant, he said that if that's what his son wants to do, then he should fulfill his request. Javier asked him not to worry since he would be monitoring him closely. The Baron mentioned that when the night of Viscount Lacona came to blackmail him, he was terrified and actually considered giving up the lands. However, after seeing his son and the efforts of the people, he found courage. The Baron said he had always been an indecisive and incompetent lord, but Javier disagreed, saying he was the opposite, a welcoming and kind person, more so than any other noble. Despite appreciating his subordinate's words, he still couldn't say he was a good lord because of it. A leader should have firm principles and be willing to act, just like Lloyd. Javier knew that the only principle that guy had was money, but he was starting to doubt if that was so bad. The Baron stated that Javier's mission was no longer to monitor but to protect him since he was the heir to this land. Javier accepted his request, but even though Lloyd had miraculously revived the family's fortunes, he would never be able to like him. In the past, the Baron rescued him and asked what he would like to be when he grew up. Young Javier said he wanted to become a knight so he could protect him. Since he survived the winter alone, the Baron was sure he would become a great knight. On that day, he carved a wooden sword and gave it as a gift, but young Lloyd mocked him, asking how an orphan could become a knight, and broke the sword his father had carved. Javier returned to his room, taking off his coat while looking at the broken sword he had kept for so many years, sure that he could never like Lloyd. The MC started attending to his recurring client, joking that Javier couldn't live without him anymore. To help him sleep, Professor Miram began reciting the discharge compression method. Almost falling asleep, Javier was sure he should hate him, but it's as if he had transformed into a completely different person. It's hard to admit, but he had become a decent person. In the middle of the night, while both were in a deep sleep, an assassin invaded Lloyd's room and blamed everything on him. The assassin leaped from the window ready to stab him, but Javier quickly woke up and attacked the assassin, cutting his sword and leg. Due to the commotion, the protagonist woke up and saw Javier immobilizing the knight of Viscount Lacona. The next day, while monitoring the work, he reminded his employees of the company motto, "Safety first." Javier arrived, saying he handed the assassin over to the Viscount. He probably tried to target him because he was fired, as Lacona is paying a lot for the water. The protagonist said it made sense since he was a well-paid knight, but all he did was get beaten up by his brother. Realizing that his master already expected something like this to happen, Javier asked why he didn't take any precautionary measures. Lloyd was confused by his question, wondering why he should take precautions when Javier is his bodyguard. Thanks to him, the protagonist could move so freely. When you think about it, it should have been impossible for a 5-year-old boy who lost his village in a monster attack to survive the winter, but he did and even became a knight. Is there anyone more reliable than him to be his bodyguard? Hearing the sincere words of the protagonist, Javier slowly started to let go of his long-standing resentment. He hated himself for thinking it, but Lloyd really is a decent guy. Since they would have finished the pipe construction by tomorrow, they could finally prepare to go to Cremo to make a lot of money. On the way, the protagonist falls asleep on Javier's back, which angers Javier enough to elbow Lloyd in the face. Lloyd wakes up, asking if he really just got hit. The MC decides to get off and asks Javier to teach him horseback riding. Javier retorts that he is a knight, not a teacher. Lloyd says it's an order. Javier calls him repulsive, but the system continues with automatic translation, making the protagonist angry and telling him to shut up. Then he receives a truly useful notification. Rumors of his incredible construction work have spread, earning him even more fame points. Realizing that fame means money, the protagonist now sees a great future ahead. The journey there isn't short. Winter arrives while they're still on the road, so they only manage to reach Cremo in the middle of winter. The Baron there greets them. He had heard rumors about a talented builder, but never imagined he would look so young. However, he's not saying this to the protagonist but to Javier. Lloyd tries to interrupt, but the Count is determined to marry Javier to his daughter. Due to the interruption, the Count gets angry, asking how a mere servant dares to interrupt a noble's conversation, even making the system laugh at the MC's face. A while later, they manage to explain the situation. Lloyd is in deep depression, while Javier struggles not to laugh. To make matters worse, the Baron says it's Lloyd's fault for being born with the appearance of a servant. This man in front of him is the Lord of Cremo, the commercial city, and also an important character from the novel, helping Javier when he became a criminal. He wants to buy jewels to decorate a statue to be placed in the sea. However, his business is declining because some years ago, a monster appeared on the coast, the Giga Titan. Although it never attacked, it remains a source of fear. In fact, he had read about it in the novel. As people in this era lack ways to attack in the water, Cremo continued to decline until it entered a crisis. He thought Javier could help, but the work ended before a solution was found. The Count researched how to scare off this creature and found out it fears mermaids, as they are its natural predators. So, he wanted to build a large mermaid statue far out at sea but gave up on the idea because raising the seabed to build a statue obstructs boat passage. The protagonist sees this as an opportunity and says he will build the support for that statue. By combining a friction pile and a crate, it will be possible to raise a column to place the statue. With Javier, he goes by boat to where he wants to place the structure and dips his head into the cold water, activating his ability. The ocean floor is flat, making construction easier. However, he can't bear to stay submerged for long as the water starts freezing his face. Javier seems happy watching Lloyd shiver from the cold and apologizes, saying it's the first time seeing someone suffer that makes him so happy. Also, Javier is curious about how Lloyd will build something from the ocean floor to the surface. To do this, he'll need to use magic. Lloyd says the only magic he'll need is cement magic. But the question is how he creates cement in this world. Back on the deck, Javier sarcastically tells him not to look where he's going and fall, to which Lloyd responds that his sarcasm is reaching master swordsman level, calling him a master of irony. Looking back, a young blonde lady asks if he's Master Lloyd, and seeing the love letter in his hand, the protagonist blushes. Lloyd, however, is disappointed when the letter is delivered to Javier. He kind of expected it, but seeing the swordsman tuck away the love letter, as if nothing happened, fills Lloyd with rage, asking how he could look at the love letter and act like it was nothing. At that moment, Javier becomes startled, realizing that the protagonist has never received a love letter. He doesn't know what to say to console him, and wishes for him to stay strong. Consumed by hatred and envy, the MC tries to tell himself that he isn't feeling this way while working on the Pillar project. The Count appears, saying he managed to gather most of the materials Javier had requested, except for volcanic ash. Ash is the main ingredient in Roman cement, and the advantages of making this cement are obvious since its structures have stood for over 2,000 years. To obtain ash, they would have to go to a volcano, but even the Count doesn't think they have that much time. The protagonist says he will find another way, giving up on making Roman cement and focusing on Portland cement. This was the cement that gave rise to modern cement. The MC knows roughly how to make it but not the specifics, so using his brain, he will experiment with all possible combinations and figure out how to make it. However, even after 129 samples, he still hasn't made a strong enough cement. Seeing his master exerting so much effort, his pets become sad, trying their best to get him out of the house a little. He shouts that he's busy but remembers a little dog he had in his past life. At that time, it was his only family. After its death, he regretted not playing more with it. Lloyd then hugs his pets and says they are more important than the research. While walking through the streets at night, Lloyd apologizes to them. Until now, he has only been giving orders as if they were machines, but if something happened to them, he would regret it deeply. Seeing his sincere feelings, the pet's relationship with the protagonist changes, and now they start to consider him part of the pack. Even the system congratulates him on one of their evolutions. The pets themselves ask for his sister Cobra to evolve. She starts to glow and float, gaining several new abilities. But the ability that catches Lloyd's attention the most is volcanic explosion. The next day, a huge explosion is seen from the mountains, and the people in the city are frightened by it. Even the Lord thinks it might be an enemy bombardment, but it turns out it was just the protagonist testing the new ability of his little snake. Using her ability, he analyzes that the ashes are indeed volcanic ashes. Excited, he tells Javier that this is an absolute gift, but due to the explosion, Javier isn't hearing anything. Thanks to Bangul, the cement problem is quickly resolved, wasting no time and moving on to the first step of the pillar construction. They built a massive diaper to collect the volcanic ashes, and when Bangul activates his ability, the diaper prevents the ashes from spreading. The entire population is impressed with Lloyd's ingenuity, especially the Baron, who will keep an eye on him and analyze his creations to make an impartial report to His Majesty the King. Once the ingredients for the cement are gathered, it's time for the second step. A large coffin to pour the cement into is made and placed in the sea, using Hippo to quickly remove all the water from the coffin. The third step is to cover the bottom of the coffin with wooden stakes to anchor it, obviously done by Javier since he is the strongest. He quickly finishes using all the stakes and asks when more will be brought, leaving the protagonist impressed that he hasn't complained so far. Reminded of his duty, Javier drops the hammer and walks away, but as usual, Lloyd uses emotional blackmail to make him come back to work. When the protagonist finishes the morning training, he uses Bangle's steel manure launcher to build the tower structure, finally pouring the long-awaited cement. Once the cement dries, they dismantle the wooden coffin, completing the first large artificial maritime platform. Lloyd explains to the Lord that they made it 50 centimeters higher than sea level to give the impression that the mermaid is floating. The Baron is still hesitant, and doesn't believe this foundation can support the weight of the statue. But if it does work, he won't be disappointed with the construction fee. At night, the statue is finally placed on the platform, a grand mermaid statue covered with sparkling jewels. To celebrate the achievement, a nobles' party is held on the ships. The protagonist, obliged to participate, feels uncomfortable in his outfit and asks Javier how he can stand wearing it. The Lord introduces Lloyd, saying it was this young man who made the statue a reality, and once again, the protagonist is ignored by people who mistake him for Javier. He knows he's smarter than most and prefers money transfers to compliments, but the look of sadness on Javier's face annoys him greatly. To completely crush his self-esteem, the Lord appears, saying it's because of his face. While the party is going on, a little distant from the ships, at the bottom of the sea, the Giga Titan observes the statue. Seeing that mermaid, his natural enemy, all he can think about is attacking her. He quickly approaches the ships, where the protagonist chats with other nobles, and Javier captivates all the women present with just his presence. He goes to the edge of the ship and drinks his wine peacefully, but he feels a slight tremor in his glass, causing him to look towards the sea. At that moment, the protagonist approaches, asking what he's doing. Javier thinks something is coming towards them, something fast and about the size of 2 ships, making the protagonist realize exactly what it is. He approaches the Lord and speaks quietly so only he can hear, that the Giga Titan is approaching and they must evacuate everyone. The Count calls his knight and asks if he feels anything strange in the sea, but he says no. Since he has reached the level of Sword Master, the Count trusts his senses. But the protagonist knows that Javier's senses are even sharper since he is the main character. The Lord continues, saying that the Giga Titan has never attacked them in all these years. But Lloyd says that now he has a reason to attack and looks at the large mermaid statue. At that moment, the Lord realizes what is about to happen and orders the anchors to be raised and the boat to be moved away from the statue immediately. Realizing that this will take too long, the protagonist asks Javier to take care of the anchors. Without hesitation, he jumps into the cold water while the protagonist throws Padang at the statue. Under the sea, Javier prepares an attack on the chains, using his mana to heat the blade. He cuts them easily, while Padang breaks the ropes that are attached to the statue. When Javier finishes cutting all the chains, he realizes that the Giga Titan is speeding up. Even though the ships are already loose, it is too late. The Giga Titan appears, knocking everything in its path. The protagonist and the others on the boat are thrown into the sea, while Padang dodges the monster's attack. Javier uses a mana explosion to quickly get out of the water, saving Lloyd from falling into the sea, while the statue is hurled into the city, destroying everything and almost hitting some people. The people thrown into the sea are in despair. The protagonist knows there won't be time to save everyone, but has a brilliant idea. He uses Hippo to drink the seawater and pull people along. Meanwhile, the Giga Titan emerges from the sea and heads to land to destroy the entire city. Javier tells his master that they should try to stop it, but the protagonist is already fleeing to the other side. Lloyd says that trying to stop something that big is foolishness. He will only die trying to do that. Many things are happening at the same time. The Lord orders his subordinates to rescue the men at sea by throwing ladders from the ships that have not yet sunk. Meanwhile, in the city, The gigantic titan continues to destroy everything. Javier asks if Lloyd is really going to ignore the people who are in danger, but his only concern is to get the money. Lloyd says they didn't come there to fight a giant thing but to keep the peace. At that moment, Javier is disappointed with his master. He thought Lloyd was someone who always fought to protect others, but now he sees who he truly is. As a gentleman, he would never abandon people in distress. Lloyd tries to warn him that if he tries to fight that thing, he will die, but Javier doesn't listen to his orders and heads towards the monster. Using his blade board and mana blast, he quickly approaches the coast. The soldiers shoot cannonballs at the gigantic titan, but they are only reflected by his armor. The soldiers are scared as not even a scratch is made. The monster prepares an attack by opening its armor, and the wind power that comes out is so strong that it destroys the attack towers. The monster's real concern is not the soldiers but the supposed mermaid that it believes is still alive. Only its advance towards the statue destroys a large part of the city, causing fear and panic among the population. A man who fell on the ground is almost trampled by the gigantic titan, but Javier appears to save him. He attacks the monster directly, hitting one of its joints, but even using the mana blast, his attack is reflected, only making the titan angrier. Javier dodges its attack, but the monster takes advantage of him being in the air and fires a burst. Even trying to protect himself, he is hit directly. With just one attack, Javier is already quite injured. He knows it will be impossible to defeat this creature, but he is willing to sacrifice himself so that as many people as possible are saved. While Javier fights to save the population, the protagonist tries to escape on a table. It's not like he's an overpowered character or anything. Even if he spent all his RP, the only skills he has are related to construction. It's not that he's not sad about people being hurt and the city being destroyed, but he can't do anything. However, when the protagonist says these words, something clicks in his head. He realizes he must return immediately since the Lord hasn't paid the construction department's commission yet. While Lloyd advances quickly to the city, Javier fiercely fights the creature. Dodging its attack, he thinks that as monstrous as it is, it's still an animal. Its weak point is probably in the eye. However, even using the mana blast and attacking the eye directly, nothing happens to the monster. With nothing else to do, Javier is attacked by one of its antennas, but Hippo appears just in time to save him, releasing all the water and returning to the protagonist's head. Lloyd is extremely angry because the giant lobster dared to interfere with his cash flow. Javier takes advantage of the opening his master created to attack the monster, but once again the attack is only repelled by the armor. He becomes scared since he can't get through this thing. At first, he thought he could win, but now he knows it's impossible. However, even though the situation is unfavorable, he remains calm since his master has returned. There is a possibility of victory. 2 minutes earlier, the protagonist was using the podong to move through the city, observing from afar as he tries to find a weak spot using his ability to understand what it's made of. Its armor is 1 meter thick, a mix of dentina and quintina, molecularly a triple honeycomb structure tightly intertwined. When Javier attacks, all the impact energy is transferred to his horn, releasing it into the air. Inside the creature, there is a sac for its hydraulic claw. If they can destroy the beak and hit that sac with the blessed mana, the creature will surely be killed. Javier asks what he should do, while Lloyd gestures to cut the horn with his hand, but the swordsman doesn't understand anything and asks if he's gone crazy. The protagonist then decides to shout, explaining that he should cut the horn, while Javier elegantly dodges the attack from the giant lobster, knowing that cutting the horn won't cause lethal damage, but his master wouldn't ask for it without a plan behind it. Lloyd warns that even though it's hollow inside, it won't be easily cut and that mana circles aren't just about hitting. Javier doesn't exactly know what he means by that, but instead of just hitting, he uses the mana circle like an electric saw to cut. The protagonist is happy knowing that his theory really worked. This time Javier's attack really seems to damage the monster, and when he is about to be attacked, the MC uses the podong to defend him. Javier finally manages to cut the horn, making the creature scream in pain, but the only thing that falls to the ground is his sword, leaving the protagonist totally shocked. Even knowing he would be crushed by the Giga Titan, Javier stayed underneath it to attack. He was willing to sacrifice himself to defeat it. However, at the last second, Podong rescued him. The hamster scolded Javier, who, even though he didn't understand exactly what he was saying, understood that he was probably being reprimanded for being reckless. After thoroughly analyzing the Giga Titan, the only remaining option to defeat it was the combination of Plan A plus D. To do this, he first called Padong and told him to take him to the location he mentioned earlier. Lloyd warned that the creature now saw Javier as a threat, so he asked Javier to lure the monster into the forest. The protagonist had bought enough time. They should have finished by now, so the only thing left to do was to trust the Count. 15 minutes earlier, the Lord was in shock watching his city being destroyed by the monster. His knight apologized for not detecting it earlier, but the Count said the fault was actually his. It was a mistake to think they could drive out the beast with just a statue. At that moment, the protagonist stated that the statue did drive it away. That monster only came to destroy it, and recommended taking advantage of this obsession. He would buy as much time as possible for the Count to prepare something. Javier continued dodging the beast's attacks, but even he was reaching his limit, yet he kept luring the creature relentlessly into the forest. The Giga Titan remained an unstoppable force that destroyed everything in its path, and Javier couldn't run anymore, getting closer to being caught by the creature. Before he was caught, the protagonist shouted, asking for applause for the bronze statue. When Javier looked, Lloyd was bringing the statue, now fully patched up. Seeing its natural enemy, the Giga Titan flew into a rage, leaving Lloyd quite pleased with its reaction. Through the novel, he knew he could trust the Count to reassemble the statue. His plan was to use it to create an opening for Javier to attack. When they got close enough to the monster, Padong drifted the cart, and they began to lure the Titan towards them. Javier seized the opportunity to attack the creature's weak point, hitting it precisely with a mana blast. Even though the attack was powerful and created a huge explosion, all it did was create a crack in the armor. Javier was saddened by his weakness, but as he fell, he heard Lloyd say to leave the rest to him. As your master spoke with great confidence, he knows he can now relax. Before he hits the ground, Hippo appears to cushion his fall. Lloyd shouts that he will protect this city no matter what. Padong is also at his limit, and he can't ask for more from him. At his signal, Padong throws the protagonist towards the Giga Titan. Earlier, when he was still heading to save the city, he thought of some plans to attack it, deciding he should use the mana blast. The problem is, for that, he would need to have a triple circle heart, and currently, he only has 2. Using the system, he starts to evolve his technique, but unfortunately, he doesn't have enough points to evolve to the final level. Even though he had decided to stay out of the fight, he wonders what the hell he's doing hanging there, while deciding whether he should try to punch it using mana. The notification that he gained 5 approval points from Javier appears, and with that, he has what he needs to create the 3rd mana circle. Now confident, he prepares the attack using one circle to protect the heart and the other 2 to collide, but the monster ends up breaking a mountain with its paw, and one of the stones coincidentally hits the protagonist's head. Due to the impact, he loses his senses, not knowing what to do anymore. He uses the 3 circles to collide, creating a triple circle mana blast that is so powerful it explodes the entire creature. From the city, people see that huge smoke. The creature is now completely dead. Lloyd's pets try to wake Javier up. Slowly, he gets up and sees the Giga Titan on the ground, impressed that he actually succeeded. However, Padong is not happy at all and tries to get Javier's attention. He follows the 3 desperate pets, finding Lloyd a little further ahead, with a bleeding head and lifeless eyes. He gets close and listens to his heart. However, Lloyd has no heartbeat. A carrier pigeon flies to the Frontera household, where the Count retrieves the letter and is completely startled by its contents. He immediately mounts his horse and sets off towards Cremo. In the letter he read, the Lord of Cremo mentions that his eldest son, Lloyd, admirably completed all the construction work they needed, but after the party, the city faced great danger, and at that moment Lloyd and his guards sacrificed themselves to save countless lives, leaving Lloyd in an unusual coma state. The Baron hurries to Cremo, worried about his son, yet recalling all the moments he shared with the new Lloyd, who never called him father, only Baron. For a moment, Frontera doubts if that young man is truly his son, but before he can dwell on it, a monster appears on the road. The knight dismounts and instructs the Count to continue while he faces the creature. He defends against the beast's first attack, apologizes to the Count, and promises to meet again in Cremo. The knight and the monster attack simultaneously, but the wolf is too strong, breaking the sword in half and biting the swordsman's shoulder. Undeterred, the knight continues to fight, even as he's overpowered. Just when he thinks he'll die, the Baron and Baroness appear, aiding him in defeating the wolf. The knight feels ashamed for not handling the creature alone, but the Baron reminds him that he's a vassal, and it's his duty to protect his people. Suddenly, the Baroness notices something alarming, a pack of wolves approaching. The knight, despite his injuries, stands his ground against the wolves, while the Baron and Baroness lose hope. Then Javier arrives, swiftly dispatching the wolves and offering to escort them, asking if anyone is hurt. The Baron's knight knew Javier was skilled, but wonders what made him so powerful since arriving in Cremo. The Baroness asks if Lloyd is alright, but Javier can't say for sure if he's alive or not. He explains that after the giant was defeated, Lloyd had no heartbeat. Worried that he would lose his new home, Javier was suddenly relieved when Lloyd's pulse returned. Although he's sure Lloyd's heart has stopped, he still has a pulse and is breathing. Touching Lloyd's chest, Javier feels the triple circle heart spinning at an incredible speed due to the magnetic fields they're generating. He can't determine the condition of his heart, only that these fields are keeping him alive. Returning to the present, people are trying to rebuild the city. Javier explains that the young master is at the Count's mansion, under a doctor's care, but his condition hasn't improved. The Count reflects on their battle against such a monstrous creature, but Javier insists he was just a sword Lloyd was using. It was his own strength that defeated the monster. Hearing this, not even the protagonist's parents believe he has this power until they hear that other nobles are heading to the Count's mansion to pay respects to Lloyd, acknowledging that without him, everyone would have frozen to death. Lloyd didn't just save the people from the sea, he also helped a soldier trapped in rubble, preventing a massive fire from destroying the city. Indeed, the entire city recognizes that they were saved thanks to Lloyd Frontera, and everyone outside the Baron's house pays homage to him. A man tries to start an argument, blaming Lloyd for the incident because of a statue he made, but he's beaten by the crowd, who are quite agitated. In the room, the protagonist finally wakes up, his head hurting, and some system notifications are in front of him. He remembers using the triple mana blast like an idiot, and wonders if he's really alive. The system confirms he is, prompting the protagonist to ask how, since his heart should have exploded. At that moment, Javier enters the room and is shocked by the scene. Lloyd is happy to see him, immediately asking how much they will be paid for the construction. For a moment, Javier is disappointed that these were his first words, but he's happy soon after because Lloyd seems healthy. The Baron and Baroness rush into the room, embracing their son who has just awakened. Whether he is the true Lloyd or not doesn't matter now, they are just grateful he's alive. In the royal capital of Magenta, a servant reports to the king about the letter from the Count of Cremo. The king is intrigued that such a man exists in his kingdom, and instructs his subordinate to send a message to Baron Frontera to bring his son and guard. The Royal Highness, Alicia, declares that she will meet this man and evaluate him herself. Returning to Cremo, the system states that your great courage, wisdom, and self-sacrifice are spreading throughout the kingdom. Thanks to having taken your social position, he gained 1,500 RP. Additionally, he also obtained a mana heart, which explains why he has so much energy even though he's been in a coma for a month. Now that he has become the owner of a mana heart, digging will be much easier. The system questions if that's the only way he can think of using it, but the protagonist wonders if he's underestimating the world's builders. Since his mana heart emerged abnormally, it has unique properties. He gained the ability of neutralized shock, which literally means he can use the triple core explosion whenever he wants. Now the work in the mine will be much faster. The protagonist explains that the mana heart needs to be protected from the impacts caused by blessed mana. It acts practically like an ammunition depot, which is why he must protect the mana heart using one of the circles. But at that moment, he didn't have a mana heart, so he was able to survive the shock caused by the explosion. Who would have thought that neglecting mana heart training would end up being beneficial? At that moment, the Lord enters the carriage, saying they must leave immediately. As he watches the Lord go to sit down, the protagonist gives a look as if planning something. The carriage continues through the city streets, and looking out the window, Lloyd wonders how much it will cost to repair the buildings and streets. The Lord says it's hard to say, but it will probably take a month of the city's budget production. Upon hearing this, the protagonist plays his card and says that if the Giga Titan had not been defeated, It would probably take half a year of production to repair everything. Realizing what's happening, the Lord immediately asks what he means by that. Lloyd says that what he's gaining compared to what they'll save in construction is a small portion. He continues using his manipulation game and mentions that he heard from some attendants that the Lord would financially compensate anyone who worked for the city's public interest. Realizing he has no choice, the Lord increases the amount he will receive by 1.5 times. The atmosphere in the carriage remains heavy. The protagonist says he wasn't asking for money, but he finally realizes that for the Lord, the lives of his civilians are worth 1.5 times the commission of his construction. Due to emotional blackmail, the Baron doubles the commission. Lloyd remains silent with a cold expression on his face, causing the Baron to increase the proposal to triple. At that moment, we see in the window's reflection the monstrous expression the protagonist is making. The Baron realizes he has just been extorted, while the MC extends his hand to him. Now with a completely friendly atmosphere, he appreciates his generosity, and says he will make good use of the special compensation. The Lord shakes his hand, though he finds it very strange since he was definitely just extorted. Still, he can't bring himself to hate him. The Count's carriage passes through the crowd, who are shouting incessantly that Master Lloyd has arrived. For someone who was a complete nobody in Korea, this is a lot of pressure. The Lord says they have prepared a podium for him, using a voice amplification sphere. The protagonist thinks of giving a generic speech since he won't make money from it. So on stage, seeing the crowd shout his name, the only thing he can think of is making money from each of those people. Instead of giving a speech, he asks if the citizens have heard of Andal coding. Realizing they haven't, he begins to explain how Andal will change their lives. All the time they spend by the fireplace will be replaced with peaceful family time, greatly improving their quality of life. Anyone interested should visit Baron Frontier's mansion, located in the Frontier Barony. Instead of a speech about saving the city, he just sold his product. The Lord understands why he doesn't hate him. Someone so obsessed with every penny of profit that persists in their goals is someone you can't hate, but rather desire by your side. Returning home, or rather, his future golden goose, Lloyd thought that the oldest knight, Lord Byron, earned far too much compared to his level of skill, which barely reached intermediate. However, the man in front of him left him completely amazed. He neatly organized the ongoing mining plans, the list of names and details of land construction, and simply everything that needed management, even down to sales and profit. Startled, the protagonist asked if he had done all this while he was away. Byron replied that he had left it for him to take care of, so he was just doing his job. A worker arrived and reported that the interior of the Andal floor project was complete and awaited inspection. Outside, he meticulously observed every detail of the floor, praising the workers for this time there were no flaws. Lloyd was simply shocked looking at him. This man he thought useless was extremely capable. If he had been born in modern Korea, he would probably be a director of a major corporation. The large-scale contract was entirely handled by the Baron and Baroness. These two had a gift beyond being lords of a state, making the protagonists realize that your luck starts the moment you are born. Javier asked if they really needed such a large warehouse for coal, but the protagonist said yes, as it would continue to come in all the time. With what he earned from construction alone, he managed to pay off more than half of his debt, and thanks to foolish neighbors, he would continue to pay without problems, leaving him truly glad that his retirement of fun and joy was almost here. Seeing the disdainful expression on his master's face, the only thing Javier thought about was punching him several times. But before he could do that, they both heard a trumpet, and the worst part was that neither of them knew what it meant. When they looked, a man on horseback holding the royal flag approached. The protagonist was angry at this ridiculous display and wanted to get straight to the point, feeling a terrible foreboding that this meant trouble. The man began to read the king's letter. Due to what he had done in the city of Cremo, his efforts to protect the nobles and civilians had been noted, and the king wished to meet with the two heroes who defeated the Giga Titan. His father was extremely happy, but Lloyd realized how problematic this situation was. If there was one thing he had learned in the army, it was never to stand out too much. Once, a superior found out he was a civil engineer and asked him to build a sauna. He studied like mad to create one, but that was also his worst mistake because it turned out too perfect, and then the superiors started making many requests of him. Upon hearing that they had to visit the Majesty, He knew he shouldn't have built that platform in the ocean. Inside the royal carriage, he felt completely hopeless. Javier said he looked like he was going to be executed, which was unexpected since his master would probably have said something like, "How much can I extract from Majesty?" This made him see a bit of color in the world again since he had read the novel and knew some things that would happen. If he could use all that to his advantage, he would surely get the most money possible from the Majesty. Arriving at the palace, Lloyd and Javier knelt before her. When they looked up, Lloyd almost had a heart attack because of her beauty. When the protagonist introduced himself, Majesty was surprised that he was Lloyd Frontera since he and his side had a much more noble aura. She also sensed a different mana flow coming from Javier, and he seemed worthy of being her fighting partner, as expected of one of the kingdom's two martial masters. She immediately discerned that Javier was special. It seemed awkward flattery wouldn't work on her. The queen appreciates the courage and altruism he demonstrated. However, she doesn't judge a man based on what others say, but rather on what she sees. As the protagonist already expected, she wants to test his abilities. The opportunity Lloyd was hoping for has arisen. If he does well, he'll secure a contract with the Majesty. So the queen asks which construction he thinks is most urgent in the royal capital. Even though the protagonist has just arrived, he obviously knows, having read the novel. The queen thinks that if he is truly capable, he will perceive it the moment he enters the royal palace. The most important construction at this moment is repairing this ruined palace. At least that's what she would like to hear, but Lloyd says that the most important construction now is a bridge over the Magenta River. The queen looks at him with a displeased look. The protagonist knows this is not the answer she expected, but given his personality, the test won't end here. Queen Magenta is the one with great authority and absolute power, a tolerant, fair, impartial woman who listens to everyone regardless of their class or rank. She asks why the bridge is necessary. The protagonist says other men might think differently and say that repairing the royal palace is most important. He knows a dragon with a bad temper took down 2 towers of the palace, which is why the roof is so heavy. However, this weight is pressing on the ground and its pillars, causing it to slowly collapse. Even after all this, the protagonist says that the repair can be postponed and that building the bridge is more urgent. The queen realizes he knew what she was thinking and still gave a different answer, while the protagonist knows that she knows he gave a different answer. The queen, like a lion ablaze, shows her power, while Lloyd is like a puppy chasing after a construction contract. He says the current Magenta River Bridge has been rebuilt 20 times and regularly collapses due to not withstanding the rising waters in spring, asking for Majesty's trust to build a new bridge that will never collapse, clearly referring to a modern suspension bridge. Seeing that the man in front of her just criticized her decision, the queen starts to like him and asks to hear more about this bridge. Majesty took the bait, and Lloyd lets out his demonic laugh. He knew from the start that the queen despised sycophants and placed trust in those who were strong in their words. However, eventually, she will be betrayed by someone she trusts and will lose one of her arms, becoming the assassin tyrant, but that's a story 3 years in the future. The queen asks what he will do if the bridge collapses. In his mind, Lloyd would pack his things and leave the country, but he ends up betting his head on it. In return, as long as his bridge stands, he would like to secure a position for his family. The redhead, who hadn't shown anything until now, gives a small smile and accepts the proposal to build a bridge. Lloyd reaches into his pocket and pulls out a contract. The queen asks if he doesn't trust his words and is impressed that he prepared a contract in such a short time. Humbly, the protagonist says that this contract states if he doesn't build a bridge honestly, she can do whatever she wants with him, thinking of it as a loyalty contract from a humble man to Her Majesty. The queen ends up signing the contract, and finds it strange that she was led to do so, but she doesn't mind. As a gesture of gratitude, the protagonist raises his but while holding the contract. Walking through the palace following the butler, Lloyd twirls and shows off the contract he managed to get from the queen. Javier asks him to be a bit more careful, since she could have taken his head if she wanted. The man next to the queen says that he is quite intelligent. She really thinks he's more cunning than she imagined. When Kyler asks if she wasn't displeased since he knew from the start that he could defeat her, the queen says no, as he seemed pathetic and adorable. A few days later, Lloyd prepares to leave with a large bag on his back. Javier asks if it's okay to go alone, but the protagonist says it's even better without him, since his presence alone attracts all the women in the region. Before heading to the royal city, his mother asked him to deliver a bag full of blankets and clothes to his younger brother, Julian. As he goes to him, the protagonist tries to remember what happens in the novel. At this point in the story, the Baron had already lost everything, and his younger brother was probably expelled from school and died wandering a back alley at night. Lloyd feels incredible for saving lives and sets out to find his brother, without even knowing what he looks like. Arriving at the Royal Academy, Lloyd looks at his brother with curiosity. Even though he's the same age as Javier, he's practically a garden gnome, and the way he's looking at him makes it seem like he must have suffered at Lloyd's hands. The protagonist decides not to be too nice and acts as if he's turned the page. Maybe then Javier wouldn't suspect so much, throwing the bag full of clothes at him, saying their mother sent it. Julian finds it very strange that Lloyd didn't insult him. Moreover, he wonders if he really came there just because their mother asked. The system warns that his brother suspects his identity because he's being too kind. To try to act a little more like Lloyd, the protagonist leaves cursing at him, but Julian finds his human behavior even stranger since he left without beating him up. Before leaving, Lloyd reminds him that their mother asked him to have lunch with Javier, even though he finds it a drag. He asks if there's any fancy restaurant around. Julian questions why he's asking, and Lloyd says he'll take him to lunch since their mother asked. At the restaurant, his brother is extremely suspicious. He orders a basic set, but the protagonist tells him to choose something more expensive since he doesn't frequent these kinds of places often. Julian wonders why he's acting so normal. He used to hit him just for looking at him directly, and starts to find it even stranger when Lloyd says he quit drinking. A few days ago, someone from the palace came to say that his brother saved the city of Cremo from the Giga Titan attack. At the time, Julian thought it was an unfounded rumor or that he stole credit for something Javier did, but seeing his current behavior, it really is like he's a different person. Suddenly, Julian gets a slap on the head. The man asks what a nobody like him is doing there. Even as he tries to explain, the man keeps punching him, saying a poor baron should eat where he can't be seen. The protagonist looks around, and two students are laughing at the situation. There are even teachers and staff there, but they're just ignoring what's happening. They call it an academy, but all they really value is family status. Lloyd wonders if he should intervene, but if he did, his brother's life would only get worse in there. Then suddenly, the student beating up his brother mentions that his family has the renowned Lacona painted fabric in their title. Immediately, Lloyd associates that this young man is the son of Viscount Lacona and again makes that demonic expression, probably planning something. Lloyd approaches and asks who his father is. The blonde says it's the merciful and wise Viscount Lacona and tells him to move, getting slapped immediately afterward, losing 2 teeth. Lacona's son flies and lands at the end of the restaurant. That's the anti-horse slap, but the system says that's not an official skill. Another student yells at Lloyd, asking how he dares to touch a member of the elite union, but he also receives a slap that knocks out a tooth. Another student who is considered the best second-year fighter appears, but is neutralized with just 1 slap. Extras keep appearing. The twin brothers get beaten up at the same time, and the guy who introduced them also gets beaten up. Even the two who were just laughing at the situation against Julian get beaten up. Lacona Jr. appears behind the protagonist, punching him in the face, but immediately realizes that was the worst decision of his life as Lloyd looks at him as if he's going to kill him. He beats Lacona Jr., but before killing him, he's stopped by his brother. Julian is worried that he will be even more intimidated at school after this, but the MC says with a smile on his face that if they die, they will never bother him again. Julian is completely shocked at how he can say something like that with such a bright smile. Lloyd continues beating and thinks he's seen many guys like this in high school. The best remedy for dealing with them is the fear of death. Suddenly, soldiers appear, commanding him to stop immediately. An old man says this is the Sacred Academy, and asks what he's doing. The protagonist, still holding the Viscount's son like a demon, leaves his brother scared, thinking he will try to hit the guards too. But to his surprise, his attitude changes completely, and he calmly introduces himself as the son of Baron Arcos Frontera. He apologizes for the commotion, but says he was only defending Her Majesty's honor. The old man says this is ridiculous and asks who would dare tarnish Her Majesty's name. Lloyd says Lacona's son was intimidating his brother, and even points to a teacher who witnessed the situation. but since there was no intention to punish him, he had to intervene. The reason he didn't do anything is obvious. The staff of this academy has been bought by the nobility. There's no way the administration of the academy doesn't know what's going on, but they will just ignore these cases. The old man asks what all this has to do with Her Majesty. The protagonist says that insulting his brother is the same as insulting him and even insulting the queen since he is a royal guest. As soon as the old men see the royal symbol, they all immediately kneel before His Highness. Lloyd says they must have understood the situation and is leaving. However, the old man plans to punish Julian since the royal invitation is temporary. But when he looks at Lloyd's face, he again has that demonic expression, leaving the director totally scared. In the corridors, Julian asks where they are going. Lloyd replies that they are going to the administration office to ask for a leave for him. Obviously, he hates this situation and asks how much more he intends to ruin his life. But Lloyd responds that this place will soon not be good for studying, and he should take the opportunity to rest his mind and keep his body in shape. At the palace, Javier explains to Julian that if Lloyd has a plan for him, then he should trust it. He also explains that the plan to defeat the Giga Titan was entirely made by the young master. Furthermore, he managed to open water channels, develop quarries, and become friends with wild orcs. The brother he knew became another person. Lloyd listens to the whole conversation behind the door, and is happy that Javier trusts him so much. Soon after, his illusions are shattered as they begin hurling insults at him. Julian asks if he really thinks someone can change so suddenly. Javier is sure they can't and has convinced himself that Lloyd is an imposter disguising as the young master. The protagonist is worried because he could be discovered at any second. Julian asks if they could have used black magic to do this. Javier responds that it's a possibility. He has even seen the theory in a book. Because of this, he investigated if there was any abnormal mana flow in Lloyd's body. The protagonist wonders when he did that, leaving him extremely worried about being discovered. Fortunately for him, Javier doesn't feel anything unusual in his body. Javier tells him to forget about it, saying it's just an exaggerated theory. The MC knows that Javier is probably sensing his presence behind the door. It's a way of saying he suspects his identity. Julian mentions it's the first time he's heard about the family debt. He thought only he was having difficulty with studies, but Lloyd managed to get their family out of that situation, so he deserves some credit at least. The protagonist, having just earned RP points from his brother, thinks that now Julian will be his golden goose. He enters the room calling Julian to join him. As he mentioned earlier, they will train his body with manual labor. Lloyd explains the first step in making bridge suspension cables. First, spread the clay and beat it until it becomes a 90 centimeters pizza. Then fill it with dirt and rocks and give it to the snake to eat. It will excrete the molten metal, and Padon will unite and wrap it. Then everything will be ready to make the cables. The MC hands him the shovel and says the tutorial is over. This task is crucial in construction, and if it's done wrong, the rest will be a mess. Julian asks why he's giving such an important task to him, but the reason is obvious. He's a frontera, so he should be intelligent and responsible. Outside the palace, Lloyd knows that the modern bridge is a great idea, but even with all his knowledge, it would be impossible to make it perfectly. This means he'll need to borrow knowledge from this world. Before he can ask for anything, the master craftsman denies his request. Lloyd already knew this old man was stubborn and would only work on projects that caught his attention, so he had prepared to visit him, innocently showing the project of building a new bridge. As soon as the dwarf sees his project, he immediately tells him to wait. If he builds something like that without the exact rigidity, it will break. The MC says when the bridge collapses, everyone on it will die, and as he's decapitated, he'll scream that the culprit was the great Cortigus, who didn't help make the trusses. The dwarf asks if he's trying to threaten him, but Lloyd says it's just an appeal to the conscience of a great master. He ends up relenting and asks to see the drawings. Upon closer observation, he is fully aware that he is the only person in the kingdom capable of doing this. The protagonist continues with a killer look and says that's why he asked for his help. The dwarf says this has caught his attention and decides to help with the project. With Julian working on the cables and the royal workshop working on the trusses, the only thing left to work on is the suspension of the towers. Lloyd and Javier use a mana explosion on the ground but are suddenly stopped by nobles who accuse him of stealing the Majesty's treasure. The protagonist is obviously confused, but it seems this was planned for a long time, as they personally went to ask for a trial from the Queen. In the meeting room, the Queen orders each side to state their arguments, and the first to speak is the Guild. Victor says that the Magina Bridge was built by the Guild's previous leader and has stood for over 30 years. He explains that in its structure, wedge-shaped columns were made to slow down the strong water current, making it practically impossible to fall. Lloyd knows that it will eventually fall, as this is information from the novel, but he cannot reveal future events to others. Boldly, he asks the guild leader how much they were paid to say that. His scandalized reaction makes the protagonist absolutely certain that he is being paid, and he recalls that in Korea, when a politician and a businessman meet, either the politician takes money from the businessman, or the businessman bribes the politician. In this case, it's the latter option. They strip away all negotiating rights and monopolize the budget. His accusation without proof ends up irritating the Queen considerably. She says that accusing someone without proof in her presence is unacceptable, and immediately sends Lloyd to royal trial. He is tied up, and his head is placed at the Reaper's aim. The Queen says he insulted her and her vassals with lies and must restore his honor. Seeing that scene, Javier prepares to enter combat as needed. The Queen asks for their final words, and Lloyd says they must exterminate the entire bloodline of the guilty party. Javier becomes even more worried about the situation. The Queen asks her two vassals if they agree, and they fully respond that it is the right thing to do. In that situation, Javier is ready to attack, but before he does anything, the Queen says they must prove the innocence of her vassals and immediately orders 4 mages to circulate the guild leader. As if he knew this would happen, Lloyd has a smile on his face. The Majesty orders the confession spell to make them tell the truth. David becomes completely desperate, asking her to wait a bit. Seeing the two hit by the spell, Lloyd starts laughing like a psychopath, and the next day, the 2 men are crucified in the public square. The protagonist made only those 2 pay for the crimes since their families did nothing wrong, thinking of himself as a good and altruistic man for doing so. As a reward for telling the truth, the Queen hands over all the kingdom's workers for the bridge construction. The archmages use gravitational magic to lighten the weight of the stone blocks, making the construction extremely fast. Bangul is tasked with taking the suspension rope to the other side, using her volcanic explosion to quickly cross the river while Padong tries to hold it. Seeing this incredible construction method, Julian says his brother is amazing. Javier also thinks he is and says that even though it's his first time doing hard work, he managed to do it every day. Before, Julian couldn't learn his sword art because he had a fragile body, but looking at his body state now, that shouldn't be a problem anymore. After some time, the bridge construction is finally complete. The Queen says this bridge will be called Lojavi, a blend of Lloyd and Javier's names. She also grants him the title of Master Builder, leaving the dwarf irritated as he built the entire platform. Lloyd thinks that only the commission money will be enough to clear his debts, but now he has another major obstacle. The Queen is probably thinking of how to use him to her advantage. If he fails now, it will break his entire plan of becoming a wealthy and lazy lord, so he will put the plan of escaping work and helping Julian in the academy into action. Returning to the castle, the Queen fulfills her part of the agreement and grants a noble title and properties to Lloyd. The castle's nobles were not pleased with this at all. The Queen thinks it's natural, since he has sunk other nobles. The protagonist says he would like to ask for something a bit bigger and mentions that if she considers his request reasonable, she may even withdraw the offer of the title and property. This piques the Queen's curiosity about what he will propose. Nevertheless, regardless of what the scoundrel asks for, her desire to keep him by her side will not change. The protagonist expresses a wish for a thorough cleaning of the Royal Academy, which is currently rife with corruption, inequality, and despicable behavior. Instead of studying, the students only use their status to harm those of lower rank. The teachers and supervisors are aware of this but choose to ignore it, furthering the social barrier within the institution. Both the headmistress and the nobles present are incredulous at what he has just said. Javier presents the results of a 4-month investigation conducted by Lloyd, which identifies all the corrupt nobles and workers in the academy. Upon hearing this, the nobles claim he is spreading lies and that such things couldn't happen in the Royal Academy. However, this turns out to be signing their own death warrants, as the Queen orders the use of truth-telling spells on them, adding more nobles to the public lynching. Inside the academy, The queen is cleaning house with her soldiers, intending to rid her land of all the filthy rats. Lloyd watches from afar, a satisfied smile on his face. Javier asks if his smile is because the nobles are being condemned, but in reality, it's because his plan to get rid of the queen and enjoy a lazy life has worked. Suddenly, the royal bodyguard appears with a message. He can go home whenever he wants, but must attend the banquet tomorrow night. Furthermore, the queen found his plan to dodge work excellent, and respects his desire to live as a slacker. Lloyd is a bit shocked to discover he has been in her palm all along. When he sees the swordsman leaving, he asks Javier if he couldn't sense him approaching. The obvious answer is no, since this man is a master swordsman. So let's go back to Lloyd's room. Julian asks if he hit Diego knowing this would happen. Basically, yes, as he already planned to investigate the academy after its construction and trusted the queen's confidence in him for it to work. Julian tells him he no longer needs to pretend to call him a little shit, and now sees him as a brother he can be proud of. Lloyd is impressed by his words, but then says it was so bad it made him want to vomit. At night, the celebratory banquet finally begins. The protagonist tries to hide from the queen, but she finds him and insists he come closer. She remarks that hiding like this makes him look like a mole cricket, with Javier fully agreeing and stating he definitely looks like one. Lloyd is annoyed that Javier seems relieved, while the queen again orders him to come closer. The protagonist apologizes and approaches a bit, but the queen insists he come even closer, making Lloyd increasingly uncomfortable. She leans in and whispers that if he changes his mind, he can come see her anytime. This excites our mercenary. As much as lazing about is good, he now has a nest to return to whenever he needs money. As he eats, happy with the new development, he remembers that in 3 years, the queen will become a villain, causing his nest and properties to vanish. It's at this moment that Lloyd hears Kyle say the banquet will continue until sunrise, reminding the protagonist exactly what that phrase means. It's the secret code used by those planning to assassinate the Majesty. The problem is, this was supposed to happen in 3 years. And also, why is the secret code to assassinate the queen coming from the royal guard? A while later, she finds herself in her quarters. The queen looks tired and wonders if she drank too much, but she thinks it must be because she's been working hard in recent days. This excessive work is due to Asfahan, an enemy state where King Samarkand has been amassing an army. But it's probably not for an invasion, since trying to invade through the jungle would be a suicide mission. At that moment, the queen feels a strong headache. She finds it strange, since the effects of alcohol should be neutralized by the mana in her body. Soon after, it becomes difficult to control her heartbeat and breathing. She tries to circulate mana to neutralize the effects, but a sharp pain hits her heart, preventing her from circulating mana throughout her body. The queen has no doubt it's poison and tries to walk to the door, calling for help from anyone who might be there. The front door begins to open, and her knight Kyle appears. The queen says he arrived just in time and that she needs his help, but the help Kyle offers is different, leaving the queen incredulous at the betrayal. Meanwhile, Lloyd, still at the banquet, tells Javier that they have a problem. The swordsman simply starts following him without asking anything, surprising Lloyd that he doesn't inquire about what's happening. He asks if Javier can knock out a master swordsman. Javier knows he's not joking but asks for some sense, and says he'll try to stop him for a maximum of 3 minutes. Turning the corner, they come across a pile of bodies. Inside the room, Kyle does his best to kill the queen, but even poisoned, she manages to defend herself. She asks why he's doing this and receives a kick to the stomach. Kyle prepares for a final attack but is stopped by Javier, who approaches quickly. Not giving him time to react, Kyle attacks, but our swordsman manages to defend, surprising Kyle as he stopped his sword using a candelabra. Taking advantage of the distraction of the battle, Lloyd approaches the queen, covering her mouth before she says anything and using the core technique to absorb the poison. Javier continues buying time, but Kyle is not playing around and activates the sword's aura. Realizing that if he completes that, they're in trouble, Javier throws the candelabra, interrupting the aura formation. He catches the candelabra back in the air and uses blessed mana to attack, impressing Kyle with his mana talent. However, he still lacks experience in real combat, and Kyle takes the opportunity to strike while Javier is in the air, cutting his candelabra and his chest. Lloyd continues absorbing the poison mana. The only thing he can do at this moment is pray for Javier to win, or everyone there will die. Kyle knows his cut was superficial but takes the moment to land another blow. However, our lunatic swordsman isn't afraid of death and charges forward, dodging the strike at the last second. Javier shouts the name Padong, who tosses a sword towards him. With the blade in hand, he's perfectly ready to face a master swordsman. Javier uses blessed mana again, directing the explosion at Kyle. Kyler manages to defend but is thrown back by the impact, stunned and scared, wondering how Javier can wield the power of a cannon. Before he can think, another mana blast heads his way, but this time he manages to dodge. Javier decides to attack from all sides, dividing the blessed mana into multiple explosions, making a master swordsman run in fear. Meanwhile, Lloyd continues the process of absorbing the poison. The queen wonders how this is possible. He's only absorbing the mana contaminated by the poison. But before she can ask where he learned this ability, our protagonist tells her to shut up, angering Her Majesty as he just reprimanded her. But seeing Lloyd spit blood, she wonders if he's trying to sacrifice himself to save her. In the banquet hall, a huge explosion is seen as Kyle is thrown back, watching Javier advance slowly. The master swordsman realizes he can't handle him alone and shouts to the guards that Javier is an intruder who tried to assassinate the queen. With a single sword swing, our mini-monster sends several elite guards flying back and, concentrating a bit of mana, causes an explosion to keep them at bay. Kyle has never heard of a man who could do something like this in history and is scared at the possibility of him becoming a sword master. However, that won't happen as he will personally ensure Javier is eliminated. Seeing the sword's aura, Javier knows he's in trouble. Just swinging his sword makes the ground stones float. Shortly after, Javier is thrown away by the aura, heavily injured, as Kyle approaches to finish him off. At that moment, the protagonist finishes absorbing all the poison, but it's too much for his body to handle. He starts vomiting black blood, and the queen says he will die like this, instructing to gather all the mana in his arm. However, our mole man refuses to lose an arm as it will make digging harder. Lloyd grabs a butter knife and activates Mana Blast using all his mana, expelling the poison all at once. The explosion is so massive that it destroys part of the castle, leaving Kyle questioning where all this power came from. But before he can dwell on it too much, Javier rises, ready for the second round. He made a vow to Lloyd, and he needs to keep that vow alive. Before reaching the royal capital, Javier admits he was hopeless from start to finish. He was supposed to be Lloyd's guard, but he abandoned his duty and ran to the gigantic titan. Because of this and his lack of strength, he no longer feels capable of fulfilling his duties as a knight. Lloyd tells him not to worry too much, as he'll deduct 6 months from his salary, leaving Javier impressed with his lack of shame. Perhaps this shamelessness of his master is rubbing off on the swordsman, as he tries to negotiate the salary deduction down to 3 months. He promises to become a sword master in a year, but the protagonist remarks that these are quite ambitious words for someone who couldn't keep the promise of losing 10 pounds. Nevertheless, Lloyd decides to help him, explaining the concept behind becoming a sword master. Before finishing the explanation, Javier interrupts, saying he'd like to do it without his help. He advances determinedly but is impaled by Kyle, who is surprised that he survived. Most people would have been torn apart as soon as they were hit by the aura, but our prodigy concentrated all his mana into one point to strengthen it. Kyle would like to see more of his tricks, but he's running out of time. At this moment, Javier starts to catch fire but still manages to hold onto Kyle's hands, preventing him from escaping. The aura is burning his body, but while holding Kyle's hand, he manages to absorb the aura directly from the mana heart. Realizing the danger, Kyle throws Javier away, who simply falls to the ground without showing any signs of life. Even the master swordsman can't detect any breath from him. As Kyle has already wasted too much time, he moves to take the queen's head but is stopped by Javier, who rises unexpectedly. Javier says he now understands mana and activates the aura, creating a new sword blade. Kyle is at a loss for words. In all his life, he has never seen such a cursed brat. Javier further increases the aura of the sword, making it giant and attacking immediately. The swordsman tries to defend, but the power of his aura is completely overwhelmed, and his arm is severed. He screams in pain as the other guards approach. Javier orders everyone to retreat, warning that they cannot face the sword master. In the room, the queen is worried about Lloyd, who shows no sign of life. The protagonist slowly wakes up and discovers that he is now immune to poison and can absorb mana from the environment. He is quite happy since these seem to be great, but due to his creepy face, the queen reflexively punches him. He is confused about being hit out of nowhere, and even the queen cannot explain why she did it. She just says that when she saw his face, she felt like hitting him. Putting that aside, she asks if he is okay and can stand up, but that massive surge of mana left the protagonist incapacitated. As the only option, he uses his new ability to absorb the mana from the environment, even drawing mana from the queen who is nearby. She is frightened by this ridiculous absorption power, and tries to get the MC's attention, but he does not seem to hear anything. The queen simply accepts it, saying he can take all the mana he needs and go help his knight. After a few minutes, he finally manages to restore all his energy. Lloyd feels his body much lighter, probably now fully restored, but before celebrating, he remembers he needs to help Javier. When he turns towards the queen, he sees she is completely out of mana. Magenta says she will ask for details later. The priority now is to stop Kyle. The protagonist puts her on his back and heads towards Javier. The queen knows he is strong, yet it is not enough to face a sword master, or so she thought. As soon as they turn the corner, they see Javier facing the guards. At that moment, the protagonist notices the sword aura and Kyle on the ground, groaning in pain. The queen orders the guards to lower their weapons and explains that these were the two heroes who protected her from her guards' betrayal. All the guards line up as the queen states that everyone who attended the banquet must be investigated. Lloyd asks if he really became the sword master. Javier casually says yes, as his master keeps putting himself in dangerous situations. This is his way of fulfilling his duty. Due to all his incredible achievements, the system activates a new function called the praise system. Whenever he does something fantastic, he earns a title, and this title comes with an ability, but he did not expect the boost from the ability to be so great. The system also gives CP, but Lloyd has to beg the system to tell him how to use it, discovering that this CP is used to see a final spoiler. Returning to the room, Lloyd complains of exhaustion, having been unable to sleep the previous night due to the investigation. Julian asks if they found the culprit behind the plan, but Lloyd explains that they used some barrier that prevents the truth spell. Because of this, he will have to stay a little longer in the royal capital since the novel had no information about the murder. Besides these events being supposed to happen in 3 years, Julian asks if Javier is still under investigation, discovering that the queen summoned him separately since he became a sword master. Julian didn't know Javier had evolved and is extremely surprised, but Lloyd explains that this is just common thinking, as he was the one who defeated Lord Kyle. At that moment, we see Her Majesty thanking our swordsman for his deeds, offering him a position as a royal knight, since a vacancy has opened up. Julian is worried that Javier might leave them, but Lloyd warns that he really doesn't know the swordsman from the Fronteras family. Javier explains that he is a knight of Baron Frontera and wishes to continue by Lloyd's side. The queen states that this is not a request but an order. Refusing an order from the queen is equivalent to treason. Our honorable knight only asks for permission to send a farewell letter to his baron, making the queen realize that he would rather die than serve her. Understanding that she won't be able to have Javier by her side, she allows him to remain a knight of the Fronteras. Javier thanks her for her mercy and heads towards the exit. He meets Julian, who asks if he will leave the family, but Javier asks him not to worry because he will continue to be their knight. The queen realizes she truly isn't lucky with people from the Fronteras property. Finally, night falls, and Lloyd is lying on the grass, checking the abilities that titles offer. Many of his great achievements have earned him titles, and his most recent one was gaining the queen's trust. All these titles grant CP, character points, but they are only counted in the system once a month on the full moon. Seeing the moon shining in the night sky, the CP is finally accumulated, and he decides to see a final spoiler. As he activates the ability, the space around him becomes dark, until suddenly the darkness is replaced by flames. Walking a bit, he realizes he's at the Fronteras property, but the beautiful place is completely destroyed, and people are dead. Lloyd starts running, asking what kind of ending this is, trying to get any information from the system, but what he finds further ahead leaves his mind completely disturbed. The protagonist sees Lloyd and Javier staring at two bodies on the ground, immediately recognizing them as the Baron and Baroness. Illusion Lloyd is desperate, apologizing for not being able to protect anyone, making the protagonist even angrier with this ending. Suddenly, he hears a noise coming from behind, and when he turns, he is faced with a swarm of insects. Javier walks up to him and prepares to attack the swarm of locusts with his sword aura. He lands 3 strikes, making the protagonist think he's really gotten rid of them, but the swarm is much larger than he imagined. At that moment, Lloyd wakes up on the lawn, utterly speechless. He asks if what he saw was real, and realizing that it's all really going to happen, he heads straight for the queen.